That is, all national challenges, problems are kind of surface issues. But to understand the surface, you have to understand what's below the surface, and that's usually the history and culture of a society. And understanding history and culture is imperative when one deals with the question of whether to go to war, how to conduct war, how to end war, and how to bring forth a circumstance where one has reasonable relations after conflict is over, and most of all, if there's any prospect whatsoever of avoiding war. And, one of the myths of our time, I think, is that the humanities are not central to job creation. But if we're to compete in the world, we're going to have to understand those with whom we compete. If we're going to have to understand our customers, we're also going to have to understand ourselves. And in change-intensive times, we're also going to have to understand how we think and analyze and correlate. And I don't think there are any greater disciplines for teaching that than history, literature, philosophy, comparative religion, etc. Finally, I would stress that America, in many ways, is an idea and an ideal. And so one of the great questions is, how do we present this idea and ideal to the world? And under the new radars of mass communication, how do we allow it not to suffer, and how do we allow it not to be lost? All of these are enormous national security implications, of which the humanities are front and center.
Let's talk a bit about national competitiveness. Two ingredients critical to innovation and competitiveness in the 21st century are investments in education to fill the talent pipeline, as well as research and development to develop new products and processes and even industries. Of course, these investments are almost entirely in the realm of science, engineering, and technology, from biomedical research to the physical sciences. As a physician and a biomedical scientist, of course, I applaud such investments. But make no mistake, our most pressing and complex problems worldwide will not be solved by science alone. How about national security, which has many of us in a state of perennial unease as we watch events unfold on the world stage? What separates people around the globe, often violently, is poor understanding of the cultures and languages and histories and religions and values of others. And lest we forget, NEH is a research agency which awards competitive grants for research projects and critical analysis that are valuable in their own right and on their own terms. Indeed, research-related expenditures account for about a third of the NEH budget and are vital to humanistic scholarship in all of our colleges and universities. The administration's proposed fiscal 12 budget reduces funding for the NEH, as I mentioned, to $146 million. I would like us to aim for level funding of this endowment to $167.5 million. I think this is a realistic and reasonable approach based on our overall fiscal situation.
Federal funding has and should continue to not merely sustain, but to invigorate scholarship in the humanities, so that new avenues can be charted which benefit both American society generally and U.S. decision-making specifically. In a free society like ours, university-based research centers and their faculty interact constantly with private think tanks and government agencies. At Indiana University's Bloomington campus, where I have taught for the past 17 years, bachelor's level students can choose from 82 languages to match their educational needs with professional trajectories. The opportunities available for acquiring linguistic proficiency range from Mongolian to Somali. Indeed, all 16 most critical languages in the DoD's language list are taught at Indiana University. Indiana University is the home to 10 U.S. Department of Education Title VI funded language and regional studies centers, including those for African studies, Islamic studies, and Latin American studies. In addition, IU has 7 national resource centers, specializing in research on critical issues and areas, such as the Center for the Study of Global Change, the Eurasian and Uralic National Resource Center, and the Russian and East European Institute. Students intent on pursuing careers in the US government and NGOs receive FLAS fellowships through those NRCs. 1999 to 2000, a Hoosier graduate student of mine conducted fieldwork on education in AFPAC settings. He did so as a Boren Fellow. His trainings in the religions, cultures, and languages of the Middle East, West Asia, and South Asia eventually led to a career overseeing the Department of Labor's reconstruction efforts in Iraq. It led to directing the civil society division of IREX, and finally running US aid subcontracted projects in South Waziristan and the Yemen. But prior to Al-Qaeda's 2001 attacks, no policy journals were interested in the results of his graduate fieldwork. Fieldwork on how militant Islamist ideology had penetrated school textbooks in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Of course, once the calamity was upon our nation, a summary of his investigations quickly found print as an article under the title A is for Allah, J is for Jihad, World Policy Journal, spring of 2002. But the knowledge should have gotten out there before. Okay. The lessons for us are obvious in hindsight. Yet the types of observations that only come from studying other cultures closely, from learning about their pasts and their presents, from analyzing and contextualizing their ideas and practices, must be given much greater credence as a routine aspect of American foreign policy. Humanities form the wellspring of knowledge, as our moderator has written, necessary in good times and in bad times, for making friends and influencing people, and even for eliminating foes. So the humanities and its international focuses must remain integral to the US education and foreign policy systems in order for Americans to surmount global challenges that lie ahead.
And so the Minerva Research Initiative, to give a little background here, this is a program started by Secretary Gates and the AAU a few years back that was designed to fund research relevant in social sciences, relevant to national security. And there are a couple programs here that I think are worth highlighting. One is the Terrorism Governance and Development Project, which I lead, which is studying the links between governance and development interventions that the United States and our international partners do in efforts to rebuild social and political order, places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and such, and the effects that those projects have. A second piece of research that's funded by the Minerva Research Initiative that's very relevant to national security is the CCAPS program at the University of Texas, which is studying the impacts of climate change on political stability. And so if we think about the long-range national security challenges that the United States is going to face, this is a critical set of issues. The research in Pakistan, which I want to focus on, has led to a series of briefings both within the intelligence community and to Ambassador Munter in Afghanistan. And the thing is that doing good work on this issue, and this really highlights Chairman Leach's opening remarks, requires understanding not the concepts we think Pakistanis are going to work with and how they think about terrorism, but understand how we think they should think about terrorism, but understanding how they actually do. And I want to give a very specific example here. So in the spring of 2009, we did a large 6,000-person survey in Pakistan in all of the 4 normal provinces of the country. And one of the questions we had on there was designed to measure support for al-Qaeda. The problem was, when you asked people about al-Qaeda, most of people didn't know what we were talking about. Right? So they would say, well, what is that? And what we learned is that they understood Osama bin Laden ki Tanzim, so Osama bin Laden's militia. So the average Pakistani understood that there was this guy named bin Laden, and he had a militia, and the US really hated him and was after him, but they didn't link that with this transnational terrorist organization that had committed the attacks on 9/11, right? So the valence of the organization to us was totally different than what it was to them, which means that when we have these other surveys that are informing policy where people were going out and asking, how do you feel about al-Qaeda? They weren't actually measuring the thing that was relevant, which is how do you feel about Osama bin Laden's militia, right? How do you feel about this organization that's threatening the United States? So the area studies knowledge and the kind of deep, years-long interaction with Pakistanis that was required for us to understand that played a big role in our ability to measure support for al-Qaeda and a number of other organizations in Pakistan. And it seems like as we're thinking about and debating what should our strategies be towards kind of public outreach and winning over this population and reducing the threat of terrorism from this country, insights like that should play a role in crafting policy, and they only come when we have a combination of 2 things. Generous grant funding, which enables us to do these large research endeavors, that are expensive, right? Surveying 6,000 people in all parts of Pakistan takes a lot of money. But the second, and more important for purposes of today's conversation, is it takes close collaboration between the humanities to understand the details of the situation, the social sciences to know how to analyze these big picture social trends, and people who are motivated and interested in studying national security issues. And that combination is supported in many cases by NEH and the other granting agencies in the federal government, and I think is making a real contribution to national security.
At the University of Delaware, we're involved in a myriad of projects. I'll speak about some of them, but I can't go into a lot of detail, obviously. But I do want to say at the onset how instrumental NEH has been in all of our work. We have received decades, over 20 years of support from the NEH in preservation and access from both the Challenge Grant Office and direct funding. And this has really enabled us to strengthen our graduate program, to broaden our curriculum, and to really move forward in working very globally. And so we are incredibly grateful. Also, NEH funding has supported a project that we're engaged in building public scholars among graduate students in material culture studies so that they can share their research appropriately with the public and get them excited about what they do. That the issues that you study in terms of the preservation of cultural heritage is true around the world. So my field in photograph conservation, these are acetate negatives that deteriorate. They deteriorate in the United States, and they deteriorate in Africa, and they deteriorate in Japan. And we need to ensure that our students are well prepared to deal with these problems around the world and to understand the challenges that exist in these different countries and their different institutions, but understanding the mechanism of deterioration as well. Another project that we're very proud of is in Erbil, Iraq. And this is focused in the education and training of Iraqis in the preservation of their cultural heritage. And what you're seeing here is the Institute for Conservation in Erbil. This was a library that was in very bad condition, actually. And we drew up plans. The University of Delaware has been working on this project with many partners, the Kurdish regional government, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, the State Department, Winterthur Museum, and the Walters Art Museum to begin with. It's now broadened. But we drew up plans to renovate this library, and I have to say, even when I went there, I mean, you just have tears in your eyes when you see this place. It is just so phenomenal. And it has classrooms for education and training, conservation laboratories to die for. I really believe that this center will be a center not just for Iraq, but for the entire Middle East. Our goal, of course, is to build preservation capacity, sustainability, and global partnerships. And so we're bringing in not just the Americans, but we're bringing in the Italians, the British, the Japanese, all to sort of work in this collective environment. We've established an American-Iraqi Advisory Council that is responsible for fundraising and advocacy and strengthening this curriculum so we ensure that it can be sustained. And at one point, I was talking to one of the students saying, you know, we're investing this time, we believe it's really important. Hey, how do you feel about the preservation of cultural heritage? And he said the continuation of cultural events is a form of resistance to war. And certainly we have seen in our education and training around the world how this really brings the world together.
About what's going on inside these cultures more closely. And had there been one or two people on key staffs or in key government agencies who says, hey, let's call some people who understand Iraqi political culture and ask them if there are cleavages we can take advantage of here. That could have spread very quickly, but you didn't have those one or two people in key positions. And so the more people we educate, the more likely it is that in future conflicts, you do have those critical people who can identify opportunities.
I think it's grassroots. I think that's number one. And I think that our state humanities councils do a great job, but we could do a lot more of that. Secondly, I think that people I anyway, like to hear stories of other people going through things in life rather than academic lectures. The idea of having someone who's a recognizable face in America, not that I'm not a recognizable face, but I mean really recognizable, standing up for these disciplines is very important.